The emergency alarm echoed through the crystal halls of the Zephyrian Council building. High Counselor Veltar moved her 8 tentacles quickly as she swam through the water-filled corridors. Something was very wrong. The Confederacy had not called an emergency meeting in over 300 years. She reached the main chamber where representatives from all 12 species waited. The room was designed to hold different types of beings. Some areas were filled with water for species like her own Nereids. Other sections held thick atmosphere for the gas-breathing Vorthans. Special platforms floated in the center where the shape-shifting gelatons could rest. Admiral Zex Keela stood at the center platform. The large saurian scales were dark green, showing his worry. His people had been warriors long ago, but that was thousands of years in the past. Now they wrote poetry and studied art, but his military training still showed in the way he held himself. "Friends," Zex Keela began, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "We have received disturbing signals from our outer monitoring stations. They speak of something we hoped never to see again." Dr. HFY, the small, furry feline scientist, activated her holographic display. The air filled with star charts and signal patterns. 3 days ago, Station Omega-7 picked up these transmissions. They are very old human radio signals, but they are moving toward our space. A wave of fear passed through the chamber. Several species' bioluminescent patches began flashing in alarm. The insectoid Vorthans clicked their mandibles nervously. Even the usually calm Mindari telepaths showed signs of stress. Veltar had heard the stories, like all members of the Council. Humans were legends from the dark times, before the Confederacy existed. They were said to come from a world so dangerous that most life forms would die just from breathing its air. The stories called it Sol 3, a planet where massive creatures hunted each other in endless cycles of violence. "Are we certain these signals are real?" asked Council Member Thekmol of the plant-like Verdani. His leaf-covered face showed deep concern. "The old records could be wrong. Perhaps humans never existed at all." Dr. HFY's ears flattened against her head. "I wish that were true, friend Thekmol, but our deep space sensors have confirmed something else. Large objects are moving through space toward our territory. The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases." She changed the holographic display. Now it showed massive signatures moving between the stars. The readings looked primitive compared to Confederate technology, but they were enormous. Whatever was creating these signatures was using brute force instead of elegant engineering. "How many objects?" Veltar asked, though she feared the answer. "Over 200 confirmed contacts. They appear to be traveling in organized formations. Some are much larger than others, possibly different types of ships." HFY paused, checking her data again. "They will reach our outer systems in approximately 6 months. The chamber fell silent. 6 months was not much time to prepare for anything, let alone first contact with a species that might not be friendly. Elder Mordoon of the ancient crystalline race spoke for the first time. His voice sounded like wind through mountain caves. "I remember the old warnings. My people kept records from the time before the Confederacy. Humans were different from other species. They did not follow the normal patterns of evolution." "What do you mean?" asked Veltar. "Most intelligent species develop on worlds that support life easily. They learn to cooperate because their environment allows it. But humans came from what the old records call a death world. Everything on their planet tried to kill them. They learned to fight before they learned to think." Dr. HFY nodded sadly. "I have studied the fragments of data we possess about their home world. Sol 3 has crushing gravity that would break most of our bones. Its weather systems create storms that could destroy our cities. The planet is covered in salt water, filled with creatures that eat other creatures. On the land areas, massive predators hunt in packs." She brought up more displays, showing what scientists thought Sol 3 might look like. The images showed a world of blue and green, beautiful but terrifying. Massive creatures moved through deep oceans. On land, thick forests covered continents, where animals hunted each other constantly. "But humans did not just survive on this world," HFY continued. "According to the records, they became the top predators. They hunted the hunters. They took over their entire planet, and then began reaching for the stars. Council member Yixtar of the peaceful aerial species made a sound of distress. Surely the records exaggerate. No species could be so violent and still develop space travel. Violence and intelligence do not work together. Admiral Zex Keela's scales darkened further. That is what makes humans dangerous, friend Yixtar. The old military records from my people speak of a species that combined intelligence with aggression. They did not choose between thinking and fighting. They learned to do both at the same time. Veltar felt her tentacles curl with anxiety. The Confederacy had been built on the idea that intelligent species naturally became peaceful. All 12 member races had followed this pattern. They had wars in their early histories. But wisdom and technology had made such conflicts unnecessary. "What do the transmissions say?" she asked. Dr. Keshai activated the audio systems. Strange sounds filled the chamber. The voice was harsh compared to the musical tones most Confederate species used, but it spoke in what their computers recognized as organized language. "This is the Terran Republic vessel Endeavor, calling any listening stations. We are peaceful explorers, seeking new homes for our people. We hope to make contact with local inhabitants and establish friendly relations. We come in peace and wish to trade knowledge and resources." The message sounded friendly enough, but something about it made Veltar's skin crawl. Perhaps it was the way the human voice emphasized certain words. Or maybe it was what the message did not say. "They claim to be peaceful," observed Thekmal hopefully. "Yes," replied Admiral Zex Keela. "But they also say they are seeking new homes. That suggests they no longer have their old homes. What happened to them, and why do they travel in such large numbers if they truly come in peace?" Dr. Keshai added more disturbing data. "Our sensors show their ships use what appears to be controlled nuclear fusion for propulsion. They are essentially riding controlled explosions through space. No peaceful species would build such dangerous technology." The council spent the next several hours reviewing everything they knew about humans. The picture that emerged was terrifying. A species that had conquered their own hostile world, developed incredibly powerful weapons, and was now moving across the galaxy in massive numbers. As the meeting ended, Veltar made the decision she hoped she would never have to make. "Send word to all Confederate fleets. Begin emergency mobilization. And may the stars help us all." The shipyards above New Harmony buzzed with activity unlike anything seen in centuries. Workers from 12 different species labored together, trying to turn peaceful research vessels into weapons of war. The task seemed impossible. How do you make a mining ship fight against whatever technology humans might bring? Admiral Zex Keela floated in the zero-gravity construction bay, watching his people attach plasma cutters to the hull of a cargo freighter. The weapons looked crude and awkward compared to the ship's elegant design, but they were the best the Confederacy could manage in such short time. "Admiral, the new crystal arrays are ready for testing," reported Commander Yishai, a Vorthan engineer. The crystalline being's body glowed with nervous energy as she gestured toward a set of gleaming structures. "We have grown them as fast as possible, but they are not as powerful as we hoped." Zex Keela examined the weapons with his trained eye. The Vorthans were master crystal growers. Their people could create beautiful structures that focused energy into devastating beams, but these new arrays had been rushed. They would work, but not for long under stress. "How many ships are ready for combat?" he asked. 83 vessels of various types," Yishai replied. 30 cargo ships with mining lasers, 20 research vessels with plasma cutters, 15 actual patrol boats, and 18 ships that the Gelatons have, modified. The Gelaton modifications were the most interesting. The shape-shifting species had literally grown new sections onto existing ships. They could change the hull patterns to confuse enemy sensors and create unexpected weapon positions. But nobody knew how well these organic additions would perform in real combat. Dr. Keshai's voice came through the communication system. "Admiral, please report to Laboratory 7. We have new intelligence about human capabilities." Zex Keela made his way through the station's corridors to the research section. He found Keshai, surrounded by holographic displays showing human technology. Her fur was standing on end, a sure sign of extreme stress. "Admiral, "This is worse than we thought," she began immediately. "I have been studying the energy signatures from the human fleet. Their weapons appear to use kinetic energy rather than directed energy." "Kinetic energy?" Zexkila was confused. "You mean they throw things at their enemies?" "Exactly, but not in the way you might think." HFY activated a simulation. They accelerate metal projectiles to enormous speeds using magnetic fields or chemical explosives. When these projectiles hit a target, they transfer all their energy at once. The simulation showed a small metal rod striking a Confederate shield. Instead of being deflected like an energy beam would be, the rod punched straight through the protective field and continued into the ship behind it. "Our shields are designed to stop energy weapons," Zexkila realized with growing horror. "They will be useless against solid projectiles." "That is not the worst part," HFY continued. "I believe humans also use something called nuclear weapons. These create explosions by splitting or combining atoms. The energy release is thousands of times greater than conventional chemical explosives." She showed him theoretical models of what a nuclear weapon might do to a Confederate ship. The results were not pleasant to see. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic section of the station, Ambassador Thekmal worked desperately to establish communication with the approaching human fleet. He had sent messages in every format the Confederacy knew: mathematical sequences, prime numbers, musical patterns, even basic pictographs, showing peaceful intentions. The responses that came back were polite but unsettling. "Greetings to the Zephyrian Confederacy." The latest message began in that harsh human voice. "We appreciate your welcome and look forward to meeting with your representatives. The Terran Republic is always interested in establishing mutually beneficial relationships with other civilizations." Thekmal read the message again, trying to understand what bothered him about it. The words seemed friendly, but something felt wrong. Then he realized what it was. The humans had not asked permission to enter Confederate space. They simply stated that they looked forward to meeting. He tried a different approach in his next message. "Honored humans, we welcome peaceful contact between our peoples. Perhaps it would be appropriate to meet at the edge of our territory rather than proceed directly to our core systems?" The human response came back within hours. "Ambassador Thekmal, we understand your concerns about security. However, our fleet includes civilian colony ships with families aboard. These vessels require safe harbor and resource access. We are confident that meeting within your territory will demonstrate our peaceful intentions." Thekmal felt his leaves wilt with anxiety. The humans were bringing colonists. They were not just exploring or trading. They intended to settle in Confederate space. In the outer monitoring stations, technicians tracked the human fleet's progress with growing alarm. The ships were moving faster than first calculated. They had also changed course slightly, heading directly for the most valuable systems in Confederate territory. "Sir," reported Monitor Chief Lixandra to Admiral Zexkila, "the human fleet has split into multiple groups. The largest formation continues toward our core worlds, but smaller groups have broken off toward the mining systems of Kepler 442 and Proxima Centauri." Zexkila studied the new tactical display. The humans were not approaching as simple explorers. They were positioning themselves to control key resources and strategic locations. This was the behavior of a military force, not peaceful refugees. "Have they responded to our latest diplomatic messages?" he asked. "Yes, sir. They continue to express peaceful intentions, but they also make references to providing security assistance to underdeveloped worlds. They seem very interested in our defensive capabilities." The Admiral's scales turned almost black with worry. In all his studies of ancient warfare, he had learned that enemies often gathered intelligence by pretending to be friendly. The humans were asking very specific questions about Confederate military strength while positioning their own forces for maximum advantage. 3 weeks later, the first human ship entered the outer edge of Confederate space. Long-range sensors revealed details that made everyone nervous. The vessel was enormous, easily 10 times larger than the biggest Confederate ship. Its hull showed signs of damage and repair, suggesting it had been in recent combat. But the most disturbing discovery came from spectral analysis of the ship's emissions. Dr. Kesshai delivered the news to an emergency council session. The human vessel is powered by controlled nuclear fusion, she reported. But the radiation signatures suggest they are also carrying nuclear weapons. Possibly hundreds of them. High Counselor Veltar felt her tentacles go numb. Nuclear weapons? In their own ships? Human technology appears to be built around the acceptance of danger, Kesshai explained. Where we would never carry dangerous materials near our crews. Humans seem to view the risk as acceptable if it provides tactical advantage. The implications were terrifying. A species that would carry nuclear weapons in their own ships would certainly be willing to use them against enemies, and if each human ship carried hundreds of these weapons, the Confederate fleet was facing firepower beyond imagination. Admiral Zex Keela made his final preparations as reports came in of more human ships entering Confederate space. His makeshift fleet was as ready as it could be in such short time. But he knew they were not ready enough. All ships report to battle stations, he ordered. And may our ancestors forgive us for what we are about to attempt. The human ships continued their approach, still broadcasting messages of peaceful intent. But now Confederate sensors could detect weapon systems charging and targeting arrays coming online. The time for talking was almost over. In her private chambers, High Counselor Veltar performed the ancient ritual of prayer to the deep currents, asking the universe to protect her people from the storm that was coming. But deep in her heart, she feared that this storm was too powerful for any prayer to turn aside. The humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The Nexus trading station had never hosted such an important meeting. Built at the neutral edge of Confederate space, it was designed for peaceful commerce between different species. Now it would become the site of first contact with humanity. Ambassador Thekmol waited in the central meeting chamber, trying to calm his nerves. Around him stood representatives from 6 Confederate species, each chosen for their diplomatic skills. The room had been carefully prepared with multiple atmosphere zones and translation equipment. They had brought gifts, trade agreements, and territorial proposals. Everything needed for successful first contact. Through the station's transparent aluminum windows, they could see the human ship approaching. The UES Endeavor was massive beyond anything in Confederate experience. Its hull was dark gray metal covered with weapon ports and sensor arrays. Strange symbols were painted on its sides, in what looked like human writing. "Remember, friends," Thekmol said to his team. "We must show strength but not aggression. Curiosity but not fear. We represent 12 species and 300 billion souls." The human shuttle docked with a mechanical precision that impressed even the station's automated systems. When the airlock opened, Ambassador Thekmol got his first look at a living human being. Captain Sarah Chen was smaller than the Confederate team had expected. The human stood only about 2 meters tall on 2 legs. With pale skin and dark hair pulled back in a functional style, she wore a uniform of the same gray color as her ship, with various badges and symbols that probably indicated rank. But it was her eyes that drew attention. They were dark and intelligent, constantly moving to examine everything around her. Thekmol had seen predator animals with eyes like that, always watching, always calculating. "Ambassador Thekmol," Captain Chen said, extending one hand in what appeared to be a greeting gesture. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, of the Terran Republic Navy." Her voice was surprisingly pleasant, though it had an underlying hardness that suggested authority. The translation equipment worked perfectly, converting her words into the musical tones the Confederate species preferred. "Captain Chen, welcome to Nexus Station. We are honored to make contact with your people." Thekmol responded in his most diplomatic manner. "We hope this meeting will begin a long friendship between our civilizations." "I'm sure it will," Chen replied, with what humans apparently called a smile. The expression involved showing teeth, which most Confederate species found disturbing. "We're very interested in learning about your Confederacy." The formal ceremonies went smoothly. Both sides exchanged information about their cultures, their histories, and their territories. Captain Chen seemed genuinely curious about Confederate society, asking intelligent questions about their government and economics. But Thekmol began to notice troubling patterns in the humans' questions. She was particularly interested in their military capabilities, their defensive strategies, and the locations of their resource-rich systems. "Captain," Thekmol said carefully, Perhaps we should discuss the purpose of your visit to our space. Your messages mentioned seeking new homes for your people. Chen's expression became more serious. Yes, Ambassador. Humanity has faced difficulties in our previous territories. We're looking for suitable worlds where our colonists can establish new communities. We would be happy to help, Thekmol replied quickly. We have surveyed several uninhabited systems near our borders. Rich worlds with good resources and no existing populations. We could offer you exclusive rights to these systems as a gesture of friendship. Captain Chen studied the star charts Thekmol projected into the space between them. Her eyes moved over the data with the same calculating intensity he had noticed before. These systems are very generous. Ambassador, she said after several minutes. But our specialists have already analyzed them using long-range sensors. They contain significant deposits of heavy metals and rare elements, far too valuable for a refugee population to simply be given. Thekmol felt his leaves begin to wilt. I don't understand, Captain. What I mean is this, Chen said, her voice taking on a harder edge. These systems are worth billions of credits. If you're offering them freely to refugees, either you're incredibly generous, or you don't realize their true value. Given that your confederacy has existed for centuries, I doubt you've missed such valuable resources. The human leaned forward slightly. So let me propose a more realistic arrangement. Joint administration of these systems. Human colonists provide security and mining expertise, while Confederate citizens maintain ownership rights. Everyone benefits. Security? Asked Dr. Keshai, who had been quiet until now. Security from what? Captain Chen's smile returned. But it was different now. Colder. From the same forces that drove humanity from our previous homes. Pirates. Raiders. Hostile species. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Doctor. Civilizations that can't protect themselves often find others willing to do it for them. Thekmol felt a chill run through his body. The human was making a threat wrapped in helpful words. We'll protect you, really meant, do what we say, or face the consequences. Captain Chen, he said carefully, the Confederate systems are quite safe. We've had no conflicts for over 2 centuries. Perhaps your people have been unfortunate in their choice of neighbors? The human's aide, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Terran Republic Intelligence. He activated a holographic projector. Perhaps these recordings will help explain our concerns. The chamber filled with images that made several Confederate representatives cry out in shock. Planets stripped of all vegetation. Cities reduced to melted glass. Orbital platforms broken into twisted metal fragments floating in space. This is what happened to our last 3 colony worlds, Lieutenant Webb explained in a matter-of-fact voice. The Krex Consortium decided they wanted those systems for themselves. As you can see, they were very thorough. The images continued. Ships firing weapons that turned asteroids to dust. Something called a relativistic kinetic strike that punched a hole through a planet's crust. The scale of destruction was beyond anything in Confederate experience. Of course, Captain Chen continued conversationally. We eventually convinced the Krex that their expansion plans were unwise. But by then, our colonies were gone. That's why we need secure bases for our families. What happened to the Krex? Dr. Keshai asked. Though she looked like she already feared the answer, Lieutenant Webb changed the holographic display. Now it showed broken ships drifting in space, and what appeared to be a shattered planet. They learned that humans take the safety of our civilians very seriously, Webb said simply. The meeting chamber fell silent. Every Confederate representative was staring at the images of destruction. The scale of warfare being displayed was impossible to comprehend. Entire worlds destroyed, billions of lives ended. Now you understand, Captain Chen said, her voice gentle again. Why we're so concerned about security. We've seen what happens when civilizations aren't prepared to defend themselves. We don't want that to happen to our new neighbors. Thekmol tried to recover his diplomatic composure. Captain, Surely there must be uninhabited systems that would meet your needs without requiring joint administration. Ambassador, Chen replied. Our deep space sensors have already identified 47 Confederate worlds that appear to be underdefended. Agricultural worlds with minimal orbital defenses. Mining colonies protected only by automated systems. These worlds would be attractive targets for the same forces we escaped from. She stood up from her chair, a gesture that seemed to make her appear larger and more threatening. We're not here to conquer anyone, she continued. We're here to find our place in the galactic community. But that place needs to be secure. For everyone's benefit, Lieutenant Webb added more images to the display. These showed human ships in formation around inhabited worlds, but instead of destruction, they showed prosperous colonies, efficient mining operations, and happy populations. This is what human protection looks like, he explained. Higher productivity, better security, improved living standards for everyone involved. It's a partnership that benefits all parties. Thekmol realized with growing horror that he was not negotiating with explorers or even refugees. He was facing a species that had perfected the art of conquest through protection. The humans would offer security from threats that might or might not exist, and in return, they would gain control of everything they protected. We will need to discuss your proposals with our full council, he said weakly. Of course, Captain Chen replied. Take all the time you need. But please keep in mind that our survey ships are already examining several Confederate systems for their defensive requirements. We want to be ready to provide assistance as soon as possible. The meeting ended with polite farewells and promises of future cooperation. But as the Confederate delegation returned to their ships, they all understood that they had just been given an ultimatum, disguised as an offer of friendship. As Captain Chen's shuttle returned to the Endeavor, Thekmol noticed something that made his situation even worse. Long-range sensors showed additional human ships moving into positions around key Confederate systems. The humans had not waited for the negotiations to end before beginning their survey operations. Send word to the Council immediately, Thekmol ordered his communications officer. Tell them that humanity is not seeking allies. They are recruiting subjects, and we may already be too late to refuse. The Confederate fleet began receiving targeting data from human ships within the hour. Admiral Zex Keela stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Harmony's Edge, watching the tactical display with growing confidence. His fleet of 83 ships was positioned perfectly among the asteroids of the Kepler 442 system. The crystalline weapon arrays glowed with power, and every ship reported ready for combat. Across from them, only 12 human vessels hung motionless in space. The humans were outnumbered nearly 7-1. Even accounting for their larger size, the Confederate fleet should easily overwhelm them. Admiral, reported his sensor officer, Commander Yishai. The human ships are broadcasting surrender demands. They want us to withdraw from the system immediately. Zex Keela's scales darkened with anger. 12 ships demanding that 83 surrender? Their arrogance knows no bounds. All ships, prepare to engage. Target their largest vessel first. The Confederate battle line began to move forward. Plasma weapons charged to full power. Crystal arrays focused their energy beams. Mining lasers that had been converted to military use hummed with deadly intent. Sir, called out the communications officer. We're receiving a wideband transmission from the human flagship. It's unusual. Let me hear it. The bridge speakers crackled to life, but instead of military communications, they heard something completely unexpected. Children's voices singing what sounded like nursery rhymes. The songs were in human language, but the translation system converted them into Confederate musical tones. What is this? Zex Keela demanded. I don't know, sir. It's coming from their main ship. But it's not directed at us. They seem to be broadcasting it to their entire fleet. Before the Admiral could respond, something impossible happened. His own ships began broadcasting the same children's songs. Every Confederate vessel suddenly started transmitting the human nursery rhymes on their emergency frequencies. Commander Yishai, why are our ships singing human songs? The Vorthan engineer's crystalline body flickered with confusion. Sir, I don't understand. Our communication systems are operating normally, but they're transmitting data we never programmed into them. Across the fleet, chaos was beginning to spread. Navigation systems started providing false readings. Weapon targeting computers locked onto friendly ships instead of enemies. Engineering displays showed system failures that weren't really happening. Electronic warfare. Zexkila breathed, suddenly understanding. They're attacking our computers. He had read about this concept in the old military archives. But no Confederate species had ever developed such weapons. The idea of turning an enemy's own systems against them was too complex and dangerous for peaceful civilizations to pursue. Sir, Commander Yishai's voice was filled with panic. The human ships are moving, but according to our sensors, they're still in the same position. The tactical display showed the human vessels in their original positions, but visual sensors showed them spreading out and advancing. The Confederate targeting systems could not decide which data to believe. Switch to manual targeting, Zexkila ordered. All weapons. Fire at will. The Confederate fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma beams and energy pulses filled the space between the two fleets. For a moment, it looked like the humans would be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fire. Then the human weapons responded. Instead of energy beams, the human ships fired solid metal projectiles. Simple rods of dense metal accelerated to enormous speeds by magnetic fields. The Confederate shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, were useless against kinetic projectiles. The first Confederate ship to be hit was a converted cargo hauler. The metal rod punched through its shield as if it wasn't there, tore through the hull, and continued out the other side. The ship broke apart immediately, its atmosphere venting into space. Impossible, Zexkila muttered. How can simple metal defeat our shields? But the humans weren't finished. As more Confederate ships fell to kinetic strikes, the human vessels began doing something that defied all military logic. They started accelerating directly toward the Confederate battle line. Sir, the human ships are on collision course with our formation. Admiral Zexkila watched in horror as the lead human vessel, already damaged and leaking atmosphere, aimed itself directly at his largest ships. The human vessel was built like a weapon itself, with thick armor and a reinforced front section designed for ramming. Evasive maneuvers, all ships scatter, but it was too late. The Confederate ships had been positioned for long-range combat, not close-quarters fighting. They were too close together to avoid the human ramming attack. The first human ship struck a Confederate destroyer with the force of a small asteroid. Both vessels were destroyed instantly. But the explosion cleared a path through the Confederate formation. More human ships followed, each one willing to sacrifice itself to break the enemy line. What kind of species builds ships specifically to destroy themselves? Dr. Keshai called out from the science station. The kind that wins wars, Zexkila replied grimly. The battle was turning into a nightmare. Every Confederate ship destroyed took dozens of crew members with it. Every human ship destroyed was apparently acceptable loss to them. They fought like they had unlimited ships and unlimited crew members to sacrifice. But the true horror came when the human flagship, badly damaged but still functional, broadcast a simple message across all frequencies. Confederate fleet, this is Captain Chen of the UES Endeavour. You have 60 seconds to surrender, or we demonstrate our orbital bombardment capabilities on the civilian population of Kepler. 442b. Admiral Zexkila's blood turned to ice. Long-range sensors confirmed his worst fears. Somehow, while the military engagement had held his attention, human colony ships had moved into bombardment positions around the inhabited world below. 6 billion civilians lived on Kepler. 442b. Farmers, artists, children, elderly citizens, who had never seen war in their entire lives. The humans had positioned themselves to hold these innocents hostage. Sir, Commander Yishai said quietly, they're not bluffing. Energy readings from the colony ships show they have weapons capable of planetary bombardment. The Admiral stared at the tactical display. He could continue fighting and maybe destroy the human military ships. But the cost would be the complete destruction of everything his people were sworn to protect. In all his studies of ancient warfare, He had never encountered an enemy willing to target civilians to win military objectives. The concept was so alien to Confederate thinking that they had no defenses against it. "All ships," Zex Keela said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Stand down. Cease fire and withdraw to minimum safe distance." The Confederate fleet pulled back, leaving the humans in control of the system. As they retreated, Admiral Zex Keela watched the human ships with growing understanding of what his people faced. These were not just better fighters. They were a species that had evolved completely different concepts of warfare. Where Confederate species fought to prove superiority, humans fought to win at any cost. Where Confederate military doctrine sought to minimize casualties, human doctrine accepted casualties as necessary for victory. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Let me hear it." Captain Chen's voice came through clearly. "Admiral Zex Keela, I want you to know that we take no pleasure in this conflict. Our goal is not conquest but security. The civilian population of Kepler 442b will be unharmed and will find their lives improved under Terran Republic administration." The transmission continued. "Your fleet fought bravely, Admiral. We respect courage, even in our enemies. That's why we're offering you the opportunity to join our security forces as a regional commander. Your experience would be valuable in protecting this sector from outside threats." Admiral Zex Keela almost laughed. Even in victory, the humans were recruiting their enemies. They didn't just defeat civilizations, they absorbed them. Within hours of the Confederate retreat, human construction ships were already installing orbital platforms around Kepler 442b. By the end of the week, the planet was producing refined metals and rare elements at twice its previous rate. The reports that reached Confederate space told a disturbing story. The human occupation was not the brutal conquest everyone expected. Instead, it was efficient and beneficial for the local population. Better healthcare, improved education, more advanced technology. The inhabitants of Kepler 442b were not conquered subjects. They were protected citizens of the expanding Terran Republic, with all the rights and responsibilities that status included. System after system began broadcasting surrender signals before human fleets even arrived. It was not fear of destruction that drove these surrenders, but the promise of improvement. The humans offered something no Confederate world could match: security and prosperity under competent management. Admiral Zex Keela returned to Confederate space as the commander of a defeated fleet, but he carried with him knowledge that was even more disturbing than his military failure. Humanity had not just conquered the Kepler system, they had made it better, and every Confederate citizen who heard about the human administration would begin to wonder why their own government couldn't provide the same benefits. The war was over. Humanity had won, and they had done it by making surrender more attractive than resistance. In his final report to the Council, Admiral Zex Keela wrote, "We did not lose to a superior military force. We lost to a superior civilization. The question now is whether we can find a way to join them before they decide we are no longer useful as allies." The answer came sooner than anyone expected. High Counselor Veltar swam through the corridors of the Council building, but everything had changed. The water-filled passages now accommodated human breathing equipment, and new sections had been built to house representatives from the Terran Republic. What had once been the seat of Confederate independence was now the regional administration center for this sector of human space. 6 months had passed since the battle at Kepler 442. 6 months since the Confederate fleet's defeat had signaled the end of their civilization as they had known it. But as Veltar entered the main chamber, she had to admit that the transition had been surprisingly gentle. The chamber itself looked much the same, with sections for each species' environmental needs. But now, human representatives sat alongside the traditional Confederate delegates. Captain Chen, now promoted to regional administrator, occupied a new platform designed specifically for human physiology. "Counselor Veltar," Captain Chen said in greeting, "thank you for joining us. We have some important matters to discuss today." The human's manner was as professionally courteous as always. She had proven to be an efficient administrator, implementing improvements to infrastructure, healthcare, and education across all Confederate worlds. Most citizens now enjoyed a higher standard of living than they had ever experienced. But Veltar knew the true cost. The 12 species of the former Confederacy were no longer independent. They were autonomous cultural regions within the expanding Terran Republic. They kept their traditions and languages, but all major decisions now required human approval. Dr. HFY has completed her final analysis of human integration methods, Chen continued. Doctor? The feline scientist stood at her usual position, but her report was being delivered to a very different audience than before. Human military officers and colonial administrators listened alongside the traditional Confederate representatives. Friends, Dr. HFY began. I have spent these past months studying human society and psychology. What I have learned explains why resistance to their expansion was always impossible. She activated her holographic display, showing complex social and psychological models. Humans are unique in the galaxy because they evolved what I call cooperative competition. Every other intelligent species develops either cooperative societies or competitive ones. Humans somehow learned to do both simultaneously. The display showed human social structures, military units that worked together with perfect coordination, while individual soldiers competed for advancement. Corporations that collaborated on massive projects while competing fiercely for market share. This makes them nearly impossible to defeat, HFY continued, because surrendering to humans does not end the conflict. It simply makes you part of their faction in a larger, ongoing competition. Admiral Zex Kila, who now served as Regional Defense Coordinator under human command, nodded grimly. Every battle we lose makes them stronger. Every system we surrender gives them more resources for their next expansion. Captain Chen responded with characteristic human directness. Admiral Zex Kila is correct, but incomplete. Expansion isn't about conquest. It's about creating larger, more stable systems. Every species humanity encounters becomes stronger as part of the Republic, and the Republic becomes stronger with each new member. She stood and gestured to the chamber around them. Look at what we've accomplished together in just 6 months. Trade between your worlds has increased by 40%. Technological development has accelerated beyond your previous projections. Crime rates have dropped to historical lows. The statistics were undeniable. Human administration had indeed improved life for most Confederate citizens. But Veltar still felt uneasy about the cost of these improvements. Captain Chen, she said carefully, your people speak often of the threats you fled from in your previous territories. When will we learn more about these dangers? Chen's expression became more serious. Actually, Counselor, that's why we're meeting today. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected energy signatures that match the forces responsible for destroying our previous colonies. The chamber fell silent. Even after months of human protection, the Confederate representatives still feared whatever had driven humanity from their original homes. Lieutenant Webb, now promoted to Intelligence Coordinator, activated new displays. The images showed massive ships moving through distant space. Their design was completely alien, not just different from Confederate or human technology, but wrong in ways that hurt to look at. The Devourers, Chen said simply. That's what we call them, though we don't know their real name. They're a machine intelligence that consumes entire star systems for raw materials. The display showed the aftermath of Devourer attacks. Planets stripped down to their cores. Stars dimmed by massive collection arrays. Entire solar systems reduced to clouds of processed elements. They arrived in our previous territory about 50 years ago, Webb continued. We tried diplomacy first, then military resistance. Nothing worked. They don't negotiate, and they don't retreat. They simply consume everything in their path. Dr. HFY's fur stood on end as she examined the data. How did humanity escape them? We didn't escape, Chen replied. We delayed them. Every human colony they destroyed cost them time and resources. Eventually, they decided we were too expensive to completely eliminate and focused on easier targets. That gave us time to evacuate our civilian population. The implications hit Veltar like a physical blow. You mean they're still following you? Following isn't the right word, Webb said. They expand in all directions, consuming resources as they go. Our previous territory was simply in their expansion path. Now this sector is in their expansion path. Admiral Zex Keela leaned forward. How long until they reach Confederate space? Chen checked her data tablets. Our best estimates suggest 18 months before their advanced scouts arrive. 3 years before their main force reaches our core systems. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. Representatives from all 12 species began talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and confusion. Silence. Chen's command cut through the noise with military authority. This is exactly why humanity came to this sector. We need allies. And you need protection. Together, we might be able to stop them. Stop them? Veltar could barely comprehend the idea. You said military resistance was impossible. It was impossible for humanity alone, Chen corrected. But we've learned things during our retreat. The Devourers have weaknesses. They're efficient, but not adaptable. They process resources in predictable patterns, and they have trouble with distributed defense networks. She activated new tactical displays showing theoretical battle plans. Confederate crystal technology can create shield networks that human kinetic weapons cannot. Human mobility and firepower can exploit gaps that Confederate forces could never reach. Gelatin shape-shifting abilities can create deceptions that neither human nor devourer sensors can detect. The plan that emerged was both brilliant and terrifying. A combined defense that used every species' unique abilities in perfect coordination. But it required complete integration between human and Confederate forces. This is why you absorbed our civilizations, Veltar realized. Not for conquest, but for the war you knew was coming. Partially correct, Chen admitted. We also needed secure bases for our civilian population. And Confederate space offered resources we required for military production. But yes, we always intended to make our stand here. Dr. Keshai studied the Devourer intelligence reports with growing horror. These machines have consumed hundreds of civilizations. What makes you think we can succeed where so many others have failed? Chen's expression became fierce. Because no other civilization has had humans teaching them how to fight. Over the following weeks, Confederate space transformed once again. But this time, the changes were openly military. Shipyards that had recently converted merchant vessels into patrol boats now began producing actual warships. Human engineering, combined with Confederate materials, science created weapons unlike anything either species had built alone. The crystal arrays that Vorthans grew could now channel human nuclear reactors. Gelaton biological ships incorporated human armor and weapons systems. Even the peaceful Verdani began developing new ways to use their plant biology for military purposes. But the most important change was psychological. The species that had once feared human arrival now worked desperately to become worthy allies. They studied human military doctrine, adapted human organizational methods, and learned to think like a species that had never known peace. Veltar spent her evenings in her private chambers, reading intelligence reports about the approaching Devourers. The more she learned, the more she understood how foolish their original prayers had been. They had prayed for humans never to come. But humans were the only thing in the galaxy that might be able to protect them from what was really out there. The universe was not a peaceful place. It never had been. Humanity hadn't made it violent. They had simply learned how to survive the violence that was already there. The final irony came when long-range sensors detected the first Devourer scout ships entering the outer edge of what had once been Confederate space. The same monitoring stations that had first detected human approach now tracked a far more dangerous enemy. Admiral Chen, promoted again to Regional Defense Commander, stood in the integrated command center that now coordinated both human and Confederate forces. Around her, representatives from 13 species worked together with the efficiency that only shared danger could create. All stations report ready, she announced. Human fleets in position, Confederate crystal networks charged. Gelaton deception fields active. Today we find out if cooperation can defeat consumption. High Counselor Veltar watched the tactical displays from her position in the command center. The approaching devourer ships looked like geometric nightmares against the stars. But for the first time since this crisis began, she felt something that surprised her. Hope. The beings they had feared might be the only things capable of saving them from something far worse. And perhaps that had always been humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not peace, but the strength to fight for peace when the darkness came calling. The final battle for Confederate space was about to begin. But this time, they would not face it alone. All ships, Admiral Chen commanded, engage the enemy. And remember, today we're not fighting for conquest or territory, we're fighting for the right of intelligent life to exist in this galaxy. The war that would determine the fate of 12 species had begun. But they faced it as they had always needed to face it. Together, with humans teaching them how to turn their cooperation into a weapon that even machines could not consume. The prayers of the peaceful had gone unanswered. But perhaps that had been the answer they truly needed all along.